Hello everyone, welcome back to GTR 24H as we preview round 3 of the 2021 Endurance E-Racing World Championship. So, my name's Alex Goldschmidt, and alongside me, as always, my good colleague and comrade in arms, Yousuf Bin-Suhayl. Yousuf, how are you keeping, buddy? I understand, along with myself, we've both been rather busy as of late during the current situation, haven't we?
Yeah, busy as bees, and looking forward to more sim racing action to be coming in another 12-hour long race, and hopefully it'll be as spicy as the last.
Yes, of course, we're heading back stateside. So we have been to Indiana, we've been to the home of British Motorsport, and now we head to Sebring in Florida. The Sebring International Raceway has been around since the early 1950s, actually hosting its first race back in 1950 itself. Originally, it occupies the site of the Hendricks Army Field, which was a training base for B-17 pilots in operation from 1941 to 1946. A lot of history, very much like Silverstone, the previous airfield, but it's hosted events such as the FIA World Endurance Championship, the 12 Hours of Sebring, for the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, and of course, most recently, where we saw Toyota Gazoo Racing in real life and LMP1 take the victory for the 1,000 miles of Sebring. Now, Yousuf, this is a fantastic circuit. There's different surface changes in terms of the tarmac on there, a lot of fast sweeping corners. You've got to have a lot of cojones, as the Spanish would say, regarding this particular track. But with 4 classes, Hypercar, LMP2, GTE and GT3 set to go into battle once again, it's looking to be a rather interesting another twist in the tail here in the 2021 season.
Yeah, and with myself coming back from more of a sprint series and sprint racing background, Sebring was one of these circuits that I'll be honest, I'd never even heard of until maybe about a year ago. And it was all when I first started doing stuff on iRacing. I started hearing Sebring, and it kind of became for me almost like the icon of endurance racing, even more so than kind of Le Mans for an online endurance racing aspect. And I was lucky enough to actually drive on the Sebring circuit. I mean, I say lucky enough, you know, you just go on the track, do a few laps. But one of the weirdest things for me is Sebring, in my opinion, out of every single track I've ever driven on, has to be easily the hardest circuit I've ever come across. I don't know what it is. There's just something about the circuit that just seems so unorthodox. And considering that there are only 17 corners, every single corner on the circuit is such a challenge. You're talking about blind braking zones, blind turning points, blind corners. And then even when you can see the corners, such as, you know, the first kind of complex turns 3 to 5, again, it just feels so tricky to get right. And we've been talking to drivers over the course of the past few weeks and talking about, you know, which circuits are you looking forward to? And a lot of them saying that they aren't familiar with Sebring. I think that's going to hurt quite a few drivers for our third race of the season.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from my own experience with obviously championships that I've commentated previously before joining the crew here at GTR 24H, E-Team BRIT, the GT Challenge, their first season actually hosted around at Sebring, and yeah, that was really an eye-opener for me. I mean, as a sports car fan through and through, having listened to the likes of John Hindor, the whole team at Radio Le Mans, whenever, you know, they've gone racing there at Sebring, you know, you've got some really, really interesting named corners as well. You've got the Fangio chicane, obviously Juan Manuel Fangio. Dan Gurney is also in there, Gurney Bend. That's just after turn 2. And then you've also got Cunningham Corner. You've got and this is what I love. You know, there's so many really, really cool names in this. You've got the Flying Fortress Straight, which is from Tower Turn to Bishop Bend. And to be honest with you, that brings that nice sort of nod to the old Air Force base, you know, the Air Force base history for Hendricks, and then obviously which is now known as Sebring. But I mean, Sunset Bend is one of the most difficult corners to get right. You know, that's not easy. You know, you're going into that at well over anywhere between 230 to 260 to 70 kph, depending on the car that you're in, and especially in the monsters that are the hypercars. That's going to be a tall order. You've got certain amount of traction control settings, but if you put it a millimeter wrong at Sunset Bend, you will end up in the barriers. And we've seen that in real life in sports car racing at Sebring, haven't we?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Sunset Bend, fantastic corner name, fantastic corner. It's almost akin to taking something like Parabolica, but instead of it being as simple, for however simple Parabolica can be, instead you've got a triple apex corner. It's so difficult to get right. And again, this is what I was talking about with Sebring being such a difficult circuit. I must have put in about a good hour of practice on the circuit. For any other track, within an hour, I feel, okay, I know how this corner works. I know what I want to do. Maybe I can't do it. But with Sebring, what are you supposed to do at this circuit? I don't really get it. And it is really comes down to driver intuition, being able to get it right lap after lap, and also working out what you want to do. And maybe I'm just a terrible driver. I know I am, but I mean, to me, I know we sometimes say, these drivers are like aliens, but yeah, anyone who can even drive the circuit to me is an alien already.
Well, at least you're brutally honest with your driving skills, my good man. But obviously, the version that we'll be using is the Grand Prix course. It's the 6th variation that has been used since 1999. The current lap record actually held by the number 7 LMP1 TS050 from Toyota Gazoo Racing, 1 minute 41.0. Previous lap records held by the likes of Stefan Johansson and Yannick Dalmas, Derek Daly, Derek Bell, Bobby Rahal, and Dan Gurney on that honour roll list. And Dan Gurney was actually the first holder of the first ever lap record between 1952 and 1966 of a 2 minute 54.6, and that was in the 1966 World Sports Car Championship. And of course, Dan Gurney at that particular time was racing with Ford Motor Company in the icon known as the GT40. So we're going to be running on the full circuit. But Yousuf, we have to have a look back first of all at what happened at Silverstone. I mean, we thought Indianapolis had fireworks. The home of British Motorsport brought it in spades in all 4 classes. And I don't think, yourself, me, you and O'Neill, we had any idea of what was going to transpire. I mean, credit as always to the crew behind the scenes, especially John and Peter over in Denmark as well for the fantastic work, as well as Niels, part of the production team, obviously our race directors, and everyone involved. I mean, it was one hell of an event, and you couldn't have scripted it, especially what happened in the last half hour.
Well, I mean, Alex, you said, we need to talk about what happened at Silverstone. No, we need to talk about what didn't happen at Silverstone, because everything happened at Silverstone. It was absolutely chaotic. We had rain coming in as well. We knew that there was going to be rain at some point during the race, and it did come down. It affected everyone. Dry setups versus wet setups, so huge, and that's always the interesting aspect when you have races that are occurring over winter. The fact that rain is so much more likely than it would be during a summer race. So that definitely came into play. We saw some fantastic late drama. I think, the one real highlight was in the GTE class between DIS and Volante, if I'm not mistaken, in the final 20 minutes. And it went right down to Andy Kurtzen actually being, pretty much taken out by a back marker contact between the two of them. Andy Kurtzen off in the grass, and then we thought it was pretty much over, and Volante would have the spot, but then Volante had a drive-through penalty, and then it was all close again, and it was just absolute chaos.
Yeah, I think, credit where credit is due. I mean, there was so much racing respect between Andy Kirsten and, of course, our very own GTR 24H version of Kimi Räikkönen, of course, Pauli Ahonen, who you interviewed with great chagrin once again post-race.
I was ready for him that time.
You were. Credit where credit is due, but also we have to look at some of the other bits and pieces. Excuse me, frog in the throat.
Of course.
But firstly, we'll go through the categories in order. Now, if anyone might remember the qualifying session, I still have my printout that I did. And we couldn't get over what had happened. Now, obviously, free practice went ahead. qualifying went ahead. But the biggest surprise, PINSIM Drilers Esports in qualifying. They basically got disqualified from quali, and they were put back based on an aggregate of no time done in session 2, but also the time in session 1. Now, PINSIM Drillers Esports in the number 10 started P25. They would have been on pole position, but Omicron SimRacing took pole position for the first time this season.
Yes.
And then we had one of the most epic drives through the field. It was like putting a hot knife through butter. Martin Hemmingson, within 50 minutes, had not only got his way up to Thomas Garcia, but had passed him for the lead. And from there, for PINSIM Drillers Esports, it was a mere formality. And I'm sure, Yousuf, I think the first thing, if I was the team boss of Omicron SimRacing, thinking, what do we need to do to keep these aliens getting past us every single time on the racetrack? That's one of the things that is the biggest talking point. What hasn't happened? We haven't seen on Omicron for the second race. They had a disaster at Indianapolis. This time, they had the jump, but PINSIM just went, yep, that's it. Full send, we're going to do a full Danny Rick, and we're going to pass them within the first hour, and it happened. And I think you and I were both surprised, well, not at all surprised, but rather shocked on how quickly the efficacy of Martin Hemmingson was in that first hour.
Yeah, it was absolutely insane for Martin Hemmingson. I remember you losing your mind every time Martin Hemmingson would pull off some crazy move round the outside of some obscene corner that he'd somehow pulled that off. But I mean, looking over to Omicron SimRacing, I think Thomas Garcia has been very vocal and has been very straight, really, with his kind of aspirations for Omicron and for the rest of the championship. And I think he's pretty much said flat out, we do not expect to beat PINSIM Drillers. You know, they fully expect that is, you know, some target in the distant future. And for now, they're focusing on races, race by race. Let's not forget as well, Omicron have been leading by technically their own merit in both round 1 and round 2. And they've been doing everything that they have. Their objective is very simply to finish second in the championship, and that is what they are driving towards. And they're putting in decent races. And I think they just want to close that gap down to PINSIM Drillers over the course of the season.
Yeah, of course, they were the only two competing in the hypercar class. No Scuderia Basilica, no Satellite Racing, who was secured second at Indianapolis. Now we turn our attention to another class that was hotly contested, and that, of course, is LMP2. So Volante Racing, effectively, on their aggregate, was only 1.1 seconds off of Omicron SimRacing in terms of the overall qualifying. They still put it on pole position. But out of every team in this season, Volante SimRacing is the only team to secure pole position, fastest lap, and also the race victory. So they have a comfortable 24-point lead over Drillers Esports. And I was really, really pleased to see the likes of James Juba being able to show his mettle. And we had the battle with GTE, as we were talking about with Volante and DIS SR Lab. But the battle between Drillers and, well, it was, you know, there was quite a few drivers in that as well. You know, we saw Deuces really come up strong with turn lower. You know, Luca Gray and all that lot. They did a fantastic job. But it was the battle between, it was Fair Racing Team and Ramada Motorsport. That was, you know, we had some fantastic battles. And I really, really felt for Fair Racing Team because they had done everything right. They were trying to do their level best, but as the rain came in, you know, you saw like Deuces and Ramada and Mugen, they were really, really coming up strong. And it just sort of fell apart at the last few moments. And we'd seen that Ramada had gone into fresh tyres. They were battling tooth and nail. That was another great showcase of just how competitive LMP2 was, because at the end of the day, Varga have been untouchable so far. Marcel Sinsic being one of the drivers, the standout drivers from that squad. but you have to give credit to the rest of the teams that a lot of them have done really, really well. I mean, Deke Hackers, they were in the mire again. Good to see that E-Team BRIT, they got their first points on the board. They took 4 points after round 2 and also completed the race, even though there was some dramas. I had a few chats in the past coming weeks with Max Spooner and the team manager and also sporting manager James Hall. They said that we were hoping for P7. I think Max was very, very vocal about that in the post-race interviews. But they're looking ahead to Sebring. Max has competed at it before, so has Bradley Brockies and Sandro Ballesteros. They were the 3 drivers out of that team that have raced there before, but only in a sprint format. It's going to be very, very different for them. But Varga's stretching out a comfortable lead. And I think it's going to be down to the likes of Drillers Esports and Ramada Ramada and Fair Racing to try and close that gap here, because after this, we're halfway through the season.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about one point because we haven't mentioned it, and it's the fact that the Drillers Esports, the 17 car in the LMP2, they had to start at the back of the grid, just like, the sister team in the hypercar class. So they climbed up the order, and I'll go back to what I said before Indianapolis and after Indianapolis, which is, in my opinion, the only team that will challenge Varga SimRacing is the PINSIM Drillers LMP2 car. And I think they came close, and I think they showed that if they can have a race where Varga make mistakes, which can happen, it's a long season, a 6-race-long championship, PINSIM Drillers, or Drillers I should say, can leapfrog them, can finish ahead of them. And over the course of an endurance season, all that matters is that you are within striking distance, and Drillers are most certainly in that range.
Okay, so Yousuf, after LMP2, we now head to GTE. Again, qualifying just really, really changed everything. It was the number 54 Musto GD Esports car that took pole position ahead of the WOSR iZone Performance 51 Porsche. And then, of course, DIS Sim Racing Lab. It really, really showcased how good the racing was. Obviously, we mentioned it earlier in the broadcast, Andy Kirsten versus Pauli Ahonen. I'm hoping for Ding Ding round 2 over at Sebring. But the winners, the number 53 Musto GD Esports, another team that did not take part in the second session of qualification, and that put them in 29th. Well, they didn't even qualify. They started 29th ahead of Pescara ADG, who were excluded, I understand, from the race at Silverstone. And David Greco, Tiziano Prioni, Giuseppe Tifoco, Marco Mazzetti, and Bianco Colilla, they ended up winning the race, whilst the 54 had a nightmare, especially coming out of the pits. They reset, went back into the garage. The rain came down. They were accidentally put on slicks. They then put it into first gear, spooled the rear tyres coming out of the garage, and instantly the car does a 180 and hits another car in the pit lane. Their race is done. Volante Racing, Pauli Ahonen, Donat Prodan, Soblodzian, and Paul Larnett, did a great job to finish second. Andy Kirsten and Yannick Godhardsson doing a great job in the number 45 once again. But the battle between Ahonen, who had plenty of Sisu that evening, and also I think during the day as well, and Kirsten, they had a really good battle, but obviously it was the LMP2 car that got in the way. We thought it was all over and done with. Ahonen's absolutely flying like nobody's business, and it just showed that the 66, when it's out of real danger like it was at Indianapolis, it can be a real title contender. But also, Musto GD Esports in the 53, they now lead the standing by 7 points coming into Sebring. I'm wondering, is HM going to come back and throw the cat amongst the pigeons? It's difficult to say, because if they don't return, that's a real shame, because that'll be something. That was something that didn't happen. We didn't see HM Engineering try and capitalize on what was a great performance at Indianapolis.
Yeah. And I mean, Alex, you know what HM Engineering stands for: hotly missing, right? HM Engineering just not present in the second round of the season. And they lost that championship advantage. One that, we thought that they were, the strongest team in GT. We didn't think it was luck that they were able to win in Indianapolis. They showed pace. They were able to take the win, and then just not present for Silverstone. So hopefully they are back in Sebring and are able to bring the championship back to Musto. But I'll be honest, Alex, I'm noticing a scary trend here at Silverstone with the teams missing a qualifying session and then doing really well in the race. So who knows what people are going to be trying at Sebring.
Yeah, very, very much the case. I mean, looking down the order, WOSR, we have to mention them because obviously the biggest moment for any one of the GTE teams was WOSR ended up careering into the barriers, going down, I think it was the Wellington Straight heading towards Brooklands. Yes. And that could have been really, really more disastrous than...
No, I think it was Hanger Straight.
It was, yes, it was. Yeah, thank you. Hanger Straight, literally, I can't remember exactly what happened, but the car went pinball wizarding right through both sides of the Hanger Straight heading down towards Stowe. They put it in the pits, but they still came back to finish in 4th, and that only puts them 2 points behind HM Engineering. And at the moment, those wondering about the standings, you can head to gtr24h.org and click on the relevant link for the current overall standings after round 2 at Silverstone. So Musto GD Esports in the 53, they lead the standings by 7 points ahead of the 45 Porsche of DIS SimRacing Lab. Volante Racing in the 66 now moves up into 4th place on 26 points, or 28 points ahead of HM Engineering. And unfortunately, you said hotly missing. I'm going to bring another bit of hot into here, saying car's not hot when it comes to HM Engineering instead of man's not hot, because obviously we didn't see him there. Musto GD Esports in the 54, it's been a difficult turn for them so far. They're still in 6th place ahead of Volante Racing, the 67, who we didn't really see much of. They scored points, actually. They scored 10 points. So both crews in Volante having a better time. Of course, Deuces Motorsport, the Porsche was not there. Obviously, I spoke to Nick Newcomb beforehand, before the event itself, and he said, yeah, we just haven't got the crews available, the drivers available, so they decided, well, we're going to do the LMP2 car, and it worked out to be a great strategy for the junior team. However, last but by no means least, we go to what we like to call the gentlemanly class, or the one that's all about fun, apart from just the winning. But the all-Russian crew of the 717 Unison Racing Aston Martin V8 Vantage GT3 has now taken, they're 1 point off of the Grand Chelem. They didn't get pole position at Indianapolis. That was a different crew altogether. That was MUGEN SimRacing, who were 2nd in the standings. But MUGEN again, they had 3rd place at Indianapolis. They finished runner-up. The McLaren 650, not on the same sort of pace as the 717. Now, just looking back at qualifying, Unison SimRacing, they qualified P15 overall, ahead of MUGEN SimRacing. You then had Danish Racing League in the number 13. Now, you'd spoken to Morten Argerson before the race, and obviously we saw some great work from that crew. The Ferrari 488 GT3 was looking rather racy. They would finish outside of the top 3. But then we also had Onemove Esports, the all-French crew in the number 26 Ferrari, having a great job. They got 3rd place at the end of it. But Unison, at the moment, it's their title to lose, because now they've got a massive 17-point advantage over MUGEN SimRacing. And going to Sebring, if they can keep this form up, and that consistency of victory after victory, they could secure it rather easily before Le Mans, if I'm very much mistaken.
Yeah, the key thing to remember is, at least it was last season, I'll have to double check for this season, but it is double points at Le Mans for the final round. But yeah, Unison Racing just look a cut above the rest, just like Varga Sim Racing in LMP2 and PINSIM Drillers in the hypercar class. I think it's closer, the GT3 field, between Unison and everyone else, than it is in the hypercar and the LMP2 class. But I still think Unison Racing just look absolutely fantastic. That being said, we do have a very tight battle for 2nd place in the constructors. none of the teams, with the exception of MUGEN SimRacing, being on the podium in both races. And Danish Racing League have shown that they can pull in points. One Move Esports right up there as well. And who knows, maybe even GlamRacing can pull in points with 2 fourth place finishes are back to back. Again, it looks so tight in the GT3 and the GTE classes.
So that's a roundup of what happened at Silverstone. Obviously, we look ahead to Sebring, but there is a big talking point, and this is to do with the final class that we have just discussed. Now, Studio 397, the developers of R Factor 2, have just released a brand new balance of performance edit for the GT3 class. And this is where it gets rather interesting, Yousuf, because there are some of the cars that we know that are on the grid that will provide. So firstly, the first car to get hit, let's look at them all individually, one by one. Yeah. So Aston Martin, okay, Unison Racing, GlamRacing are using that car. So the balance of performance adjustment, there's a 1% decrease on engine power. There is also an additional 5 kilogram weight penalty. There's also been modifications to the Your Aero's response. So in terms of the effects of the car possibly sliding sideways, especially if you put the power down. There's tweaks to the diffuser stalling, reduced slipstreaming effects on drag, so a lower speed gain when drafting. And there's also recalculated fuel consumption. We then look to other cars now. We would have the Ferrari 488, no weight penalty, no reduce in performance. But again, just like every other car, a bit more on the McLaren 650S. So you've got new values for the draft lifts, for the front wing, the front splitter, the rear wing, and the diffuser. The modifications to the error response, so sliding sideways, tweaks to the diffuser stalling, reduced slipstreaming, adjustable drivetrain losses, resulting on more engine power on the wheels. Now that's actually quite a big thing, because especially that is the power transfer from the engine through the gearbox into the drivetrain. So there could be a little bit more of ammunition coming from Mugen SimRacing in comparison with the Aston Martin. They've actually corrected the issues with the damper travel to the bump stop. Now, a damper is effectively, in latter terms, a shock absorber, and you have the bump stops, which are actually at the top. So there is a travel from when the car actually hits a curb, for instance, and that shock absorber starts to compress. The bump stop is right at the top, and that helps with regards to the absorption rate, and also how the shock absorber actually goes up and down. So it's quite helpful on that. Also, there's a new P4 position 4 on the rear wing for a default setup. We do also have some McLaren 720S GT3s, if memory serves me correctly, on our grid. Again, same sort of thing. The Porsche 911 GT3s, they've got quite a few changes on that. New values for the draft lifts on both the front and the rear wings. The diffuser, so there's quite a lot of familiarity, and very much a case of a sort of a consistent amount of changes. But the Porsche looks to have quite a few. It has the adjusted drivetrain losses, just like the 650S, adjusted center of gravity height, and also the chassis inertia, the way that it moves. You've then got more default sets on traction control, rear anti-roll bars, towing in on the front and rear of the vehicle, recalculated fuel consumption. There's quite a lot that could really change, I think, the dynamic. And Unison Racing might think, well, we've been given a bit of a duff car here. Of course, with any simulator here, Yousuf, BOP, new tyre models, new power restrictions, new changes with regards to active yaw, bump stops on shock absorbers, toe in, toe out, camber, K-star. There is so much detail that these drivers can go into on these cars. I think what's going to happen is that I think just by looking at those changes between most predominantly the Aston Martin Vantage and the McLaren 650S, that Unison Racing now know they are not out of the woods. They know that Mugen's going to come back at them, and they are going to come and fight.
Yeah, and you have to remember this is the GT3 class, or the GT rookie class, the gentlemanly class. For those kind of still getting into sim racing a bit, they are still fast by, don't get that wrong, but they're not quite at the level of the guys in, LMP2 and the hypercar class. And you do have to remember that they would have got used to the cars that they're driving with, and those changes now, that car won't be as, well, it's not even a case of will it be as quick, will it be as comfortable for them to drive. And I'm still slightly sad that we're not seeing drivers being able to switch between cars. Otherwise, I think we might be seeing some Audis and Bentleys coming in, which might spruce things up. But a lot of changes to the Porsche, and we'll have to see how much it affects Unison, whether it can help them out maybe in some way, or whether it will be a factor that maybe causes them to not take a win. And don't forget, Unison on 53 out of a total of 54 points. So they are looking strong. And, well, we'll see whether these BOP changes does affect them in Sebring.
Well, firstly, Yousuf, thank you for your fantastic insight as always. And for those GTR 24H fans out there wondering when free practice gets underway, it will be 8 p.m. Central European Time on March the 4th. That is the official practice session for the Sebring 12 hours. We'll then have our first session of qualifying at 1900 CET on Friday the 5th of March before qualifying 2. So we have a daytime and a nighttime qualification session. So the nighttime one will start at 21:30 Central European Time. And we'll get things underway with round 3 of the 2021 GTR 24H Endurance E-Racing World Championship. The Sebring 12 hours, round 3 of the season on Saturday, March 6th, starting at 12 noon Central European Time. So on behalf of Yousuf and myself, Alex, thank you for watching. We'll see you very soon for round 3 of the season.